In this video, I'm going to show you a pretty consistent strategy to put the Sikh Empire on the map and eventually unite India. I didn't play optimally economically, nor did I really explore the total potential of the Sikhs, which is quite immense, but I did eventually form India and even created the Khalistani power block to cap it all off. This video is intended to be a somewhat beginner-friendly guide which will introduce you to some of the mechanics of Sphere of Influence and the 1.7 patch. I did make some mistakes in the run, and I'll point them out as I go, but ultimately it's not like they were totally game-ruining mistakes. The gameplay here was recorded on the early access 1.7 patch, so some things won't be the same as the release patch, but the majority of what will go down here is accurate to what goes on now. Victoria is a very complicated game for beginners, and the best way to learn is to go play, so I do hope this video helps you, but ultimately, if you want to get good, take what lessons you can from this video and then go play the game. You'll make mistakes and die, but each time, you'll get a little better. Anyway, let's get into the guide. The moment you drop in as the Sikhs, you have a few problems on your hands. First off, Punjab only has 56% market access. Secondly, you're surrounded by enemies. And third, your government laws kinda suck. Thankfully, we have answers for all these issues. Set your grain to export focus to trigger the Corn Laws Journal, which I'm sure by now almost all of you are aware of. This will let us get off of serfdom and traditionalism later. Don't forget to put the landowners in government for the journal. For tech, I like to work my way towards railways, but you could make an argument for some society techs for authority and influence. I wouldn't actually recommend a military tech, since the next step of units, skirmish infantry and shrapnel artillery, will require ammunition, and we simply don't have the resources or infrastructure to make that. Anyway, our opening move to help us escape our enemies is to start out strong and declare war on Sindh. I chose to make them a tributary because I wanted to try out for an investment this run, which was my second ever playthrough on Sphere of Influence by the way, but I think it is probably better to just conquer Sindh in most cases. You also want to start improving relations with Britain, because you don't want them ever trying to fight us when the EIC is breathing down our neck. Either way, our plan is to bait the East India Company into the war and fight them for Punjab, Delhi, and war reparations. Delhi is important because it has iron and paper industries that we will need, and reparations are important because this war will be critically expensive. As an unrecognized power, our interest rate on loans is huge, so we'll be stuck paying off loans forever if we get into deep enough debt that we can't dig ourselves out of. Fighting the EIC is actually pretty simple as the Sikhs. In a 1v1, you do actually defeat the EIC since your army is superior to theirs for now, but where the EIC often wins is when all the princely states gang up on you, or worse, when Britain joins the war. I believe in most cases Britain will not join this war, but if they do, just restart because it's already over for you. A very powerful strategy against the AI is to sit in a defensive stance for a while, letting them bash their heads against you for a bit, and then kill their manpower. I like to put a pretty large army on Sindh so we can capitulate them fast, and then keep a cursory force on the EIC which can defend for long enough that the larger army can defeat Sindh and head back. If you're feeling scared, drop an enlistment effort decree in Punjab and raise unending conscripts to help you, but you don't actually need it. I put an agriculture, industry, education, and infrastructure decree in Punjab to help my economy and literacy. We'll be wanting literacy to help us build actually good industries later on, and there's no reason not to get started on that now. In terms of buildings, by the way, this is a rule of thumb for Victoria 3 in general: build your construction goods up first. As the Sikh Empire, that's basically just wood. Some countries use iron construction, but small, unrecognized powers like these will almost always use wooden buildings. I recommend building logging camps in Kashmir and Pashtunistan, if only because Punjab has no infrastructure left. Anyway, the war should start with the EIC dying in Punjab while your army pushes into Sindh. A critical part of keeping the war on your side is to ensure the armed forces are happy so you get their combat bonus. That little bonus is what you'll need to get the edge on the EIC that will ensure your victory. The new AI for 1.7 is pretty apprehensive to put their entire army on a front line and likes to keep some men back home to protect against naval invasions. That means that the EIC actually tends to not fight you with their full force, which is literally perfect. I was able to push the EIC before even beating Sindh simply because over 50 battalions were in Calcutta, protecting them from a naval invasion from their landlocked enemy. Very wise move. You should have an easy time pushing into Delhi, and once you do, you'll start draining the company war support. In my particular run, an opportunity came up that I had to take advantage of. Persia was in a diplomatic play, and I noticed that I had a pretty good chance of asking them to become my subject in return for support, but I'd need to do a yo-yo sway on them. For those that don't know, a yo-yo sway is when you join the opposing side in a war, which adds your army strength to the perceived power of the opposition. This makes the side you're opposing more open to sway requests because they believe they need the help, allowing you to ask for more when swaying to their side. The tricky part is that you can never join a play against yourself, so you can't yo-yo sway while at war. Basically, I'm in a play against the EIC on my own side, so if I join a side in the Persia war, I can't then swap to join sides against myself in the game's logic. I decided to end my war with the EIC early and only take Delhi and Punjab, ignoring the reparations. In hindsight, this was a mistake, as acquiring Persia should have been less of a priority than getting that immense Raj money, especially because Persia would probably get into another play later that I could use to dissuade them, but it'll be fine. Anyway, I joined Herod's side after making a peace deal with the EIC, and then offered support to Persia in return for them becoming my tributary. I didn't bother to raise new armies because I knew that Persia could win on their own. Persia immediately asked for their own market because I had no ports, and so couldn't really make any connections to them, so I granted it, which lowered their liberty desire a lot. It actually lowered it enough that I could turn them into a vassal, and that meant Persia would transfer a pretty significant portion of their income to me. Subjects are valuable mostly because of this income transfer. Being able to get money from the government without taking it from our pops means that I can support a larger army and bureaucracy without having to harm my economy by adding unnecessary taxes. As a general lesson, taxes are bad for the country and should be avoided when possible, but the realities of running the government mean you need those taxes. If you can replace taxes with the exploitation of other economies, that's very wise, and is why I wanted those company reparations. Unfortunately, Persian tribute is nothing compared to EIC reparations, so I kinda messed up with this play. My next war was to attack Kabul, and the reason I'm going so hard is because the EIC can and will jump down my throat if they get the chance, so while we have a 5-year truce, I need to attack people and build up my power. I'm also making Kabul a tributary, mostly for the reduced infamy cost, and to avoid the heaps of radicals that conquering Afghanistan directly would get me. After Kabul backed down, I went for Herat, but Russia unfortunately decided to join the war, and Herat offered them the war goal to liberate Persia. This was very painful for me. I knew I could beat Herat before Russia could stop me, but I also knew I couldn't possibly defend Persia from Russia. Although I couldn't have known Russia would do this to me back when I was fighting the EIC, it makes the decision to pursue the Persian protectorate over the EIC reparations even worse. On the bright side, I got the Modern Conservative event in March of 1838, and this is very good because the Modern Conservative is an agitator that has the market liberal ideology. Market liberals do not like serfdom and do not like traditionalism, which is good. If you have the Voices of the People DLC, you can put agitators in charge of interest groups, which is pretty critical to this strategy. If you don't have the DLC, then you can also hope the guy starts a political movement for something good and try to pass it that way, but it'll be way harder. I recommend going for homesteading instead of tenant farmers to help reduce the strength of the landowners. Anyway, Herat was defeated with ease, and then Russia pushed very easily into Mazandaran despite my best efforts. At first the front looked about even, but the Russian army has better cannons and significantly more men than I do, so I didn't stand a chance. I did pass homesteading during the war in April of 1839, which was going to help my country significantly by making it so that peasants can work whatever job they want, instead of being stuck in the subsistence buildings. Afterwards, I was deciding between laissez-faire and interventionism. I chose laissez-faire, but in hindsight, I'd actually recommend interventionism, if only because you'll want to have a more hands-on approach to what you build in these early stages. The general consensus on laissez-faire and interventionism as economy laws is that laissez-faire is better overall, but in particular applications, interventionism can be better. Those particular applications are what's disputed, and without spending hours talking about how Victoria III's money works, basically laissez-faire translates the labor of your nation into usable money the most efficiently, but interventionism lets you access that money while deleting some of it from the economy. My opinion is that very small countries should be on interventionism for a little while to focus on building up their construction industries, since laissez-faire might see your capitalists spending all the construction on textile mills that are profitable, but you need wood and iron to support your army and construction costs. Either way, the wars in Afghanistan continued. I attacked Kunduz next, but then Persia joined the war, swayed by the possibility to reclaim Herat. I considered adding war goals to Persia, but it would have cost too much infamy, so I decided not to. Instead, I just added reparations and banning slavery because I could. I passed laissez-faire in 1840, and this was very good. My government budget was relieved by the capitalists using up most of the construction sectors themselves, but now it would take me forever to build government buildings. The big problem with Punjab is that because of its lacking infrastructure, it's not very useful to build in until we get railways. But railways will require a supply chain of tools, iron, coal, steel, and engines, which is a tall order when we don't have much construction or education. One shortcut to a lack of manufactured goods is free trade, which makes trading much better and usually is a good choice. You'll miss out on tariffs, but oftentimes more goods is more useful than more tariffs, but again, it depends on your situation. As the Sikh Empire, we are happy to export our goods, which are mostly cash crops, to help facilitate our import of guns, steel, paper, and whatever else we need. When determining what trades to make, it's really the simple principle of buy low, sell high. Check your market for goods that are cheap, and try exporting them to places where they're expensive. If you're missing a good, find a market that has it and import it from them. The only problem we have is that we have no ports, so we really can't do much trading at all except with Russia, China, and Britain, with whom we share a land border. An interesting strategy could actually be to join the British power bloc, but I didn't pursue this path. By joining the British Empire, you'd be joining their market, which means you'd suddenly have access to a ton of goods, but it would also make you a cuck and open up to being subjugated, since Britain's bloc can subjugate anyone in it at the cost of some cohesion. Anyway, by 1842 or so, I had control over Kabul and Delhi, which is important. These two places have iron, and a lot of it. They do both lack infrastructure though, so again, we can't build it up yet until we get our first set of engines and railways going. Given that this video is intended to be a beginner's guide, I will not be going in depth on how the economy works, but instead giving you some heuristics that will help you play better even if you don't understand why they're useful. The first of those heuristics is that construction goods are always priority 1. In almost every case, your largest expense will be construction goods, and with cheaper construction goods you can expand the economy faster and more efficiently. Your ability to build is everything in Victoria 3. With buildings come jobs, and those jobs provide wages. Wages can be taxed in the form of income taxes, and the money left over for the pops buys goods. Those goods, when bought, give profits to the buildings, and those profits are reinvested by the capitalists to create more buildings, and the loop continues. Your goal is to always keep this loop healthy, which does not always mean that your budget is the priority. Now in this case, as the Sikh Empire, we do have to prioritize our budget, and that's because of the existential military threats all around us. See, pops spend their money on their needs. Capitalists spend their money on investments to make more money, and the state spends its money on bureaucracy, the military, subsidies, and, most painfully of all, interest. You need bureaucracy to effectively tax people and for stuff like healthcare, police, and education. You need subsidies to keep certain unprofitable businesses in business. You need the military to keep you safe from other countries, but interest? Well, we pay our interest to avoid bankruptcy, which comes with a ton of awful modifiers. In high interest rate countries, like the Sikh Empire, you can end up paying almost your entire budget to it if you mismanage it, and in low interest rate countries like America, Britain, or France, it can be so minuscule you really don't have to think about it much. Your interest rate is determined by a few factors, but most critically by your prestige and recognition. If you're a huge power, you pay very little interest, but if you're an unrecognized minor nation, you pay huge interest. As the Sikh Empire, you pay over 20% interest on loans, which is absolutely insane. Therefore, we want to avoid debt whenever possible, but we also need a big army. In theory, the best economic move is to just delete the army and to build the economy, but I think you can imagine where that'll get you. For that reason, we're going to put effort into maintaining a healthy budget. Not just a balanced one, but a surplus budget. Normally I actually wouldn't recommend this. For example, in my most recent America video, you can see me edging bankruptcy in most of the video, and that's because my interest rate was about 2%. I have no problem paying a couple £1,000s in interest in order to accelerate my economy faster than anyone else. The reason we need a budget surplus as the Sikh Empire is because we need to avoid debt whenever we can. You'll notice in 1844, when I went after Nepal as a free tributary basically, I raised my armies, and my budget entered the negative. This is why I need some gold reserves. Although my budget is positive at peace, raising my massive Sikh army will eat into that gold reserve faster than you might think. Luckily for me, Nepal backed down, but had they not, I may have ended up taking some loans, and I'd have to pay those loans back later with a hefty chunk of interest piled on top. In previous patches, I had recommended checking your expenses and finding ways to cheapen them by making buildings that would reduce the cost of your government goods like paper, guns, and construction. But with patch 1.7, we have another way to increase the budget surplus. We can make government industries that generate a profit for us. Government buildings are inefficient because profits from them do not 100% translate into the budget. With interventionism, you get 50% of the profits and the rest is destroyed, while with laissez-faire, you're supposed to get 0% of it, as it all goes to the investment pool for the private sector to use, but in the current patch it's bugged so that you get a small portion of the profits when the ownership of the building is mixed. Bugs aside, the lesson is that laissez-faire can make it hard to field a massive army, as it takes away your ability to make profitable industries to fund the army, even though laissez-faire doesn't burn any money into thin air how interventionism does. Again, applying this to the Sikh Empire, we seek a budget surplus to avoid going into debt, which means I recommend picking some profitable industries and keeping them government owned in year run. In particular, wine is very good this patch, because its consumption uses were changed so that now pops will buy way more wine than they used to. Unfortunately, most of the good land for wine is in Punjab, which has no infrastructure, so you may have to try other goods. Regardless, let's get back to how my run went, because in 1844, I took some pretty drastic moves to gain power. The greatest fear for the Sikh Empire is to be attacked by the EIC while they have the support of all their puppet princes, because in total, the EIC and their puppets are quite strong, even though the princes are pretty weak. At the end of the day, the princes don't have quality, but they do have quantity, and it's enough to overwhelm your forces. In 1844, I was looking for new paths to power, so I attacked Qing, which might sound idiotic, but Qing was bankrupt and lost the Opium Wars, so their army was useless. Much like in EU4, China can act as a bank of money for you in Victoria 3, if you can occupy just one state of theirs, you can get war reparations from one of the largest economies in the game, so I thought this would be wise. I started the war to transfer Tibet and then added my reparation goals, but then the new aggressive AI of patch 1.7 did what it does and decided to attack me. The East India Company attacked me directly, which triggered the nightmare scenario. I am now at war with not just the company, but all of India effectively. Thankfully, the Qing had no primary war goals on me, so I just backed down and then put all my men on the front. I do not intend to go out without a fight, so I'm going to add some war goals, mostly to transfer subjects, because it's much less infamy than conquering states, and now I have to somehow think of how to win this war. I added war goals for Jodhpur and Baroda, since they're relatively large princes, and topped it off with Kutch to keep the borders nice. So, how do you win in a situation like this? Well, it's all about defending until you have the advantage, assuming you have at least a somewhat acceptable army. Obviously, if you have a paper army, just defending will still make you lose, but if you can give ground while killing the enemies, you can eventually counterattack. An additional thing that will help is conscripts. The Sikh Empire has professional armies, they can't get many conscripts, but you can use the decree that gives more conscripts to help you out. Just be aware of the immense cost of war. For a war like this, which to be clear you want to never have happen, you absolutely need to have the armed forces approval for the extra offense and defense. I started passing local police not with the intention of actually passing the law, but just to get the armed forces approval up for the duration of the war. Thanks to some relatively lucky army placements from my opponent, I was actually able to push almost right to Calcutta. See, the AI doesn't always manage its fronts well, so we can see that I have a losing front in Sindh that I'm just defending, and it may fall eventually, but it's falling much slower than my push through the Gangetic Plains to Calcutta. You can see that in October of 1845, Sindh fell by the time I was knocking on Calcutta's door, and the EIC will still have to occupy Punjab to defeat me. In fear of them taking Punjab though, I did send most of my army back there to push the invaders out, since I was worried I wouldn't be able to capitulate the company as quickly as they could capitulate me. We can see in this particular battle in Sindh happening in September of 1846, how my enemies are out of manpower, and this is why we defend for so long. The AI will eventually recover its manpower, but we've been able to reduce it so much that now their armies have 35 battalions but only 8,000 men. It should be 35,000 men for that many battalions. With the armies running out of manpower thanks to our defensive posture, we were able to run down Calcutta, and despite being attacked by the full force of the EIC, we have defeated them in April of 1847. This time I did grab war reparations, and that should stop my budget from staying in the negative for too long. It is possible to weather the nightmare scenario, but it certainly isn't easy, and it requires many years of defending to weaken the enemy, while shifting front lines around to try and push enemies away from Punjab. If the AI had only put a war goal on me to liberate Sindh, I may have lost this war because Sindh got occupied relatively quickly. One nice thing about transferring the EIC princes is that they're already puppets, so I do actually get a reasonable budget transfer from them, and don't be afraid to raise strict payments if you want an even better budget. In April of 1848, something happened which only happens in the early access patch for the game, so this is something you can't replicate in the current patch. When Britain reduced the EIC's autonomy to make them the Raj, the princes went free. I'm not sure why this was happening, but it was fixed for the release patch. So obviously this is of great benefit to me, but to be honest with you, it doesn't change the strategy for the Sikhs very much, which is why I kept this run for the guide anyway. By this point in the run, I've defeated the EIC twice and I have control of Afghanistan. If you can pull that off, it just becomes about managing your economy and fighting the EIC one-on-one when possible. As a quick note, since I didn't totally cover it earlier, to fight the EIC without its puppet supports, you can either attack another nation and hope the EIC joins, allowing you to add war goals to them, or you can directly attack one of the EIC's subjects. This will only drag in their overlord, not every other puppet. For example, it might be wise to attack Jaipur and then add war goals to the EIC to transfer a subject or two. When you add a transfer or liberate war goal, those subjects do enter the war, but the EIC plus maybe 2 or 3 subjects is not nearly as scary as the entirety of India coming after you. In 1848, you're going to see me pass consumption tax laws, and this is mostly because it's easier to get off of consumption tax law into better tax laws like proportional or graduated taxes. I also did it because a political movement wanted it and I wanted the loyalists it would give me. My plan was to eventually swap to proportional tax, although I ended up dragging my heels on it for a while and missed out on a lot of taxes I could have gotten on per capita taxation. In 1850, I went after Qing again, looking for control over Tibet, a humiliation, their reparations, and to liberate Uyghurstan, and I can make a tributary of the Uyghurs later, and perhaps even push deeper into China in the future through the desert. In all honesty, my prime interest is to just get those Qing war reparations. The Qing have a huge army, but their army is so paper thin that it doesn't matter. You'll always beat them. In the current patch and pre-release patch, the Qing AI is so incompetent that it'll only ever build government bureaucracies, so it'll always be bankrupt, and therefore it's quite easy to beat them. Unfortunately for me though, the Qing had their fragile Unity journal entry fire here, and that created a second nightmare for me. An unwinnable war that I'd already invested huge resources into. These happen sometimes and it sucks. I don't get Tibet anymore because I can't transfer a nation that's not a subject, and I don't get to release the Uyghurs because they're already free. I can't even get my Qing reparations because now I have to somehow occupy Beijing when I have no boats. I could in theory violate Uygurstan's sovereignty and then violate Shaanxi's sovereignty, but that's a meme, costs huge infamy, and would make me have to fight actually competent armies. Think what you will of me, as I could have white peaced here eventually, but feeling like this was kinda dumb, I chose to swap to China for a second, capitulate the war, and then go back to the Sikhs. Sometimes in Victoria 3, this is what you have to do. Anyway, the Uyghurs had a rebellion right after in 1852, and I of course supported them in return for making them a tributary, and with that, now I have control over my northern front. I also annexed Kutch in a war which Awad joined, and I made them a tributary in the war. Unfortunately for me, France decided to get involved too, so the nightmare kinda just keeps going for me. By this point, I've also started to push my army a bit too hard because I'm taking on debt a bit faster than is sustainable, but the reality is that I need to keep expanding so I can eventually catch up to the likes of Britain. France joining the war was certainly not nice of them though. Thankfully, France just never sent any units to the front, or perhaps took them too long to arrive before I fully occupied Kutch. The problem is that France put a war goal on me for a treaty port in Sindh, and I'm going to have to waste my money on keeping the army ready for the eventual onslaught of French naval invasions. To be very clear, I'm happy about this more aggressive AI in the macro, but in the micro, I'm pissed about France getting involved over me annexing my own subject. The more debt I take on here, the worse my interest payments will be, but then I was saved by an angel from overseas. The British, perhaps proud of my war with the French, took on my debt in 1854, an absolute godsend as I was halfway to bankruptcy there, and now I can get a fresh start. All it cost me was my dignity. Anyway, from here, I've established a pretty strong start as a Sikh Empire, but it's certainly not perfect. I've got a political movement for census suffrage that I'd like to use eventually, but right now I really need some peacetime to build up my gold reserves again and develop my economy. Me being me though, I chose to make a bunch more construction sectors in the hopes of growing my economy faster than my debt, which is a smart move usually, but I think I underestimated sometimes the crushing pain of interest payments on unrecognized powers. I jumped my construction up to 74 points and then annexed Sindh so I could finally get a coastline. Looking to fix my budget, I did add more taxes eventually. I can be stubborn sometimes about debt building. Anyway, by this point, I consider the nightmare period of the run to be over. We've escaped potentially horrific losses, and we can mostly just coast to economic dominance using our own pops. The nice thing about both China and India is that you have so many pops that you'll never have to worry about employment or demand for goods. If you make any good which can be consumed by pops, there will be a demand for it. I wanted to get some better laws now since I was kind of tired of the landowners being so powerful, so I abdicated the throne to a census suffrage movement and instituted a republic with voting, while also eradicating many of the radicals just like that. The abdicate button is crazy strong, as is the resign from office button. Many countries will benefit from a little more freedom in Victoria 3, so getting those voting rights going, as we did just a moment ago, will shake up our interest groups a little bit. In the case of the Sikh Empire, you have a pretty massive cohort of peasants to deal with still, and peasants tend to vote for the Conservative Party since they're often religious and conservative. Despite that, we can see that our intelligentsia and industrialists still have way more clout after the election of 1862 than they had under autocracy. We're not going to sit on our laurels while liberalizing, since there's no reason to, but most of my conquests this era just aren't that big. For example, I went after the Boers, because, well, every Victoria 3 bunch would steal Boer gold. I was able to demand Lourenço Marques from Portugal, and they gave in, which was very convenient and allowed me to conquer the Boers quite easily. I gave control of the area to Oranje, because it would have been a lot of infamy to straight up conquer both Boer states. Making one a tributary and conquering the other, alongside the Portuguese demand, gave me 37 infamy already. Back to liberalization, the reason you want to liberalize is for access to better interest groups. The funny thing is that thanks to the Corn Laws maneuver from a few decades ago, we already have the economic laws we want, but with more power to the industrialists and intelligentsia, we're able to open our borders or change our church and state laws and so on. I did choose to reduce my voting laws to landed voting later, and that was because census suffrage gave too much power to the peasants. I wanted to erode the power of the landowners more, but peasants tend to support the landowners because they support the other groups that make up the Conservative Party. By reducing voting laws, you're making wealth play a larger role in the election, which is good because most industrialists and academics are quite rich. It's not always wise to put massive voting rights if you actually want to liberalize. The law did not pass before the next election sadly, so I still got a dominant Conservative Party. I did however get a political movement to enact total separation, and once they became revolutionary, I saw my opportunity to destroy the conservative establishment. When you resign from office or abdicate the throne, all interest groups in government lose 90% of their clout for a few years. So I resigned to the total separation movement with the conservatives in government, which will kill their clout and also trigger a new election. You'll see now that although I haven't eradicated the Conservatives from the vote with the change to landed voting, we have significantly increased the presence of other parties. It likely would have been better to have wealth voting than landed voting, to slightly tip the scales in favor of the people a little more than money, but it's not always easy to know which voting law is best. I started changing to agrarianism, and this is actually not part of the guide. This is because I was on the early access patch and wanted to see how it would work. I was experimenting basically and wanted to see how effective it would be to have those extra government dividends. I also got a bit ambitious with my conquest, and I invaded Kokand, but Russia intervened and demanded some land from Uyghurstan. I also tried supporting a Burmese revolution, but Vietnam and the Heavenly Kingdom came to their support, which meant I had no chance of winning there. I did try to fight both wars, but it was a waste of money to do so. There was no chance I'd win, and I was already a little bit in debt, which was costing me a lot of interest. I tried to be kinda smart and invade Tibet to get access to Burma, but once I got my front up to Burma, Victoria III's awful front system allowed the Burmese army to reach the front before my men could possibly reach it, allowing them to occupy eastern Tibet. That would normally be fine, as I could then push them out, but then the war ended because I ran out of war support, but the Burmese occupation of Tibet did not. Sometimes this happens where a country is occupied by someone they're not at war with. This is not a DLC or 1.7 issue, it's just a Victoria 3 issue that's always been present. I do not know exactly how it works, but basically I can't win this war anymore, nor can I lose. Rather than let it drag on forever, given I should be winning, I chose to swap to Tibet and capitulate. Looking at my budget after putting in agrarianism, we can see that in this particular case it was likely a bad move. I make a lot more government dividends now, but my interest is through the roof because laissez-faire gives you half off your interest payments. It would have been worthwhile most likely if not for my debt, and this is why I'll tell you to avoid debt as an unrecognized power. I'm paying over 40k to interest, which could be used to build more buildings or a bigger army. Instead, I'm stuck here. My income started increasing massively in 1876, and I wasn't sure why honestly, so I went into my expenses to check, and we can see that my government goods cost dropped drastically. This is because I was building sulfur mines, whose sulfur was being used in my paper mills, which allowed them to produce more paper while maintaining a profit and therefore dropping the price. It's always very important to check that you're not throwing your money away on paper and stuff. Now that I was on agrarianism, I was also able to nationalize industries, and looking back, I really shouldn't have. I was taking out debt to nationalize industries that weren't even very profitable, but it is what it is. I do treat this video as a guide, but that doesn't mean it's played perfectly. Thanks to this though, I did discover one bug which got fixed in release, and that was the ability to nationalize more than half of an agriculture industry while having homesteading. On homesteading, workers always own at least half of all agriculture industries. In this early access patch, if you nationalized beyond half of the ownership levels, then a week later half of the levels went back to the local owners, which meant that you wasted your money. Anyway, I went back to being a monarchy in 1878, which doesn't sound very liberal, but I have achieved pretty much all the law changes I wanted in this chapter, so going back to monarchy was wise so I could get more authority. I tried to annex Kabul, but Russia of course intervened, and I say that like it's a bad thing, but again, it's a good thing the AI is intervening and getting involved. It just sucks for me in this scenario. You might notice, by the way, that my debt was massively increased, and again, this is the consequence of my poor decision making about nationalization. As we've played more and more of the new patch, we've discovered that nationalizing makes very little sense in most cases, so I basically threw away my powerful budget for nothing. But again, it's fine, just don't do that in your run. In Victoria 3, you can make tons of mistakes and still be successful in most cases. From here though, I want to move on to my nation's militarization, because this is where we can become way more powerful and start working towards uniting India. Also, turns out I may have actually been huge bane with all the nationalizing because Britain once again took on my debt in 1880, which took my budget from negative £32,000 to a gain of £71,000. This is what I mean about how crippling interest is for unrecognized powers. I solemnly vow to not take on immense debt as an unrecognized power for no reason from here on. The way that you become stronger as a military power is not really through making more of an army, but rather making a more advanced army. In Victoria 3, quality trumps quantity in just about every case. So the most important addition to your military power in the early and mid-game is getting to skirmish infantry if you don't already have it, and shrapnel artillery. Shrapnel artillery is so incredibly strong and should be used as much as possible. When it comes to the supply chains necessary for this stuff, most of what you'll be needing is ammunition, which is composed of lead and explosives. Explosives need fertilizer, and fertilizer needs iron and sulfur. So yeah, the fact that we have control over Rajputana is very important. Sulfur often isn't that easy to come by, nor is lead, so if you have none and need to modernize your army, it's very important to secure some either by trade or by conquering someone that's weak and does have those resources. Unfortunately for me, I have awful technology and also was mostly focused on other tech branches, so I don't even have skirmish infantry yet. Obviously, to help with research you'll need universities, and had I not been in constant crippling debt, I'd likely have built them much earlier. Even though I did really need universities, I still didn't really prioritize them because I needed more iron and more tools and just more everything. It can sometimes feel painful to invest in universities because they don't contribute to the economy and also cost your budget quite a bit of money, but it's definitely worth it, and a smarter player would have made them a lot earlier. I did use my still not so modern army to take over parts of China, mostly because they'd have revolts and then I could support one side to get a free tributary. It's pretty beneficial to make Chinese warlords into subjects because they tend to have pretty high tax bases due to their population and propensity for land-based taxation. Controlling Shaanxi also cut Russia off from invading China by land, which was useful for me as Russia had been encroaching on my sphere of influence for a while. In general, everything in Victoria 3 goes back to the economy, in the sense that if I wanted to expand my military faster, I'd need to expand my economy more. I chose to build a ton more construction sectors, but I got overzealous so I removed a handful afterwards. There's no shame in stepping back from your construction if you need to, and I swore to stop taking on huge debt for no reason, so I did indeed step it back in 1888. I could also have just chosen to raise taxes, as by 1891 my budget was strong enough to be on minimal taxes, but I think I still go back and forth here and there about whether it's better to keep taxes low or crank them up and make more buildings. The ups for low taxes is that your pops will be richer, meaning they can buy more goods, which makes industries more profitable, while also keeping radicals low. But with high taxes, you simply have more budget to make buildings, which can supply goods more cheaply. I think the meta of going super high taxes early game to boost the economy, and then scaling them back towards the early mid game is still best. I abdicated my throne again in 1892, mostly for loyalists. Remember that abdicating makes 25% of all pops more loyal, although it did turn me into a theocracy, and theocracies are the only government type that can't abdicate or resign, making them the worst government form. I will say, cool flag though. I was able to support France's war with Qing in return for a guarantee of independence, which I took out of fear of Russia, but honestly, France had laid down so many insane war goals against Qing that I shouldn't have let them get away with it. They were just straight up conquering a huge section of China, which is super cool to see the AI doing, by the way. From here, a lot of time passed without much going on. I was trying to avoid a revolution by juggling my laws around, including getting technocracy. A big plus I got was the Heavenly Kingdom, when they had a rebellion which was small enough to be a minor power. This was huge for me and gave me a huge section of China for free. I also got lucky that France's war against Qing got bricked by a revolution. The French war goals to conquer the Chinese coastline no longer mean anything because the war goals go away when the revolution starts. You'll also notice by this point that I am indeed using shrapnel artillery. My army is now mostly modern, and this is very good. The problem is how late I got it. Getting to this level of power in 1900 is pretty late and should have been much earlier, but that's a lesson you can apply. In general, in Victoria 3, running a positive balance is a sign that you should be doing more with your money, but scarier than that is running a negative balance that prevents you from being able to run a positive balance due to interest. My country is growing exponentially, but it could have been doing that so many decades ago. If not for the 2 British bailouts that I got, I'd be even more screwed, and relying on bailouts certainly isn't reliable. I'd talk more about militarization, but it really is just about researching technology and getting the right supply chains. I recommend mostly using infantry and artillery for actually winning battles, but using cavalry for getting more battle occupation from each win. You can have a high cavalry army for fronts against weak enemies, and a high artillery stack for actually tough enemies, and then maybe a full infantry unit for defense if you want to be a lot more optimal. If you want to make a lot of conquests, you'll want recognition to make infamy a bit less of a hamper, but recognition has changed drastically from old patches, and has changed a little bit from the early access patch. In the early access patch, you needed the technology civilizing mission to get access to the journal entry that let you start getting recognition. Now you just need colonialism. This makes it way more accessible. You'll need good relations with one great power, and there's a couple different things that can increase your progress towards recognition. Previously you needed 80 relations with a great power, but now it's only 50, so much more doable. I got an embassy with France, which significantly increases my recognition progress, and from there, well, you either have to wait until the embassy gives you recognition, or you have to start fighting great powers and putting war goals on them, while still keeping good relations with at least one great power. Like previous sections though, I didn't just sit on my laurels. I actually made my first bit of progress towards Europe in 1902, when my powerful military was strong enough to convince a Spanish Civil War member to become my tributary, which brought me into conflict with Russia. I can't add war goals here sadly, so I can't enforce anything on Russia to help me get recognition, but I did get to test out my shrapnel artillery and skirmish infantry on Russia, which worked nicely, as I occupied much of Russian Central Asia. I grabbed a bankroll off of an Indian rebellion and got the Chinese Republic as a tributary, again by supporting their revolt. That left just UA out of my control in China, and a handful of treaty ports that the AI won't build ports in. I believe the AI does now build ports in their treaty ports as of release patch, but it was nice for me that all these treaty ports were inactive. I got Japan next in 1904, and Punjab basically became the master of East Asia, all thanks to the collapsing monarchies of the East. Nonetheless, I did not have recognition. One issue I was running into was that I needed more iron and coal, but all my subjects were constantly bankrupting, most likely because of my huge subject payment demands. So I annexed Shaanxi despite the infamy costs so I could access their natural resources. Keep in mind that if your subjects bankrupt, the negative to building efficiency will affect your ability to build in them too. I spent several years at peace here to focus on building more of my economy and to handle the constant brewing rebellions in my country over republicanism and monarchism, which would in the long term best be addressed by trying to make more loyalists, but my military ambitions precluded me from focusing on petty goods like grain or clothing. That being said, it would have been indeed wise to focus on that more. It's hard to balance all the different things you want to prioritize in Victoria 3, which to me is a mark of its quality. Anyway, I maxed out my recognition bar in 1912, but of course something happened at some point that made France lose opinion of me, and getting to 80 relations is very difficult in Victoria 3, so I'd be stuck here for a while. Thank goodness they dropped it to 50 in the release patch. I ended up needing to make friends with America instead because I just couldn't get relations with France high enough, and then I got a lucky break in 1915 where a random event boosted my relations with America by 20, and I'd already gotten them to about 60. Finally, I got recognized, and I know I skipped a ton of time here, but yeah, very little happened. I changed some tax laws and built a lot more buildings. Hilariously, the treaty event also gives 30 more opinion with that country, and I can't help but think I'd have liked those 30 relations sometime before the treaty was signed, but it's okay. It's time to unite India at this point, which likely was possible before, but I was focused on some of the new mechanics 1.7. So it's pretty late in the game now. We're at 1916, and so it doesn't feel good to be doing this so late, but yeah, I was exploring the new mechanics for most of the run. We're now going to unite India, and the best way to do that is to attack Britain and demand the transfer of the British Raj. This will of course shoot you to pariah status, but there really isn't a way to form India without doing this. All of India is so massive that the infamy cost on all its states is too crazy to take without just transferring the Raj, not to mention how many wars it would take to annex all those states. I also demanded South Africa since I had a lot of land there, and reparations from everyone. You might notice my immense debt at this point, and my logic was that we were at the endgame anyway, and forming India would be my final act, so who cares about debt anymore? I got that debt from changing to steel construction. In general, it's best to build up some gold reserves before changing construction methods because of how much they could slingshot your expenses. In 1917, after Britain had its monarchy overthrown, I did win the war, which is easy both because Britain was busy in a civil war for most of the war, and because my army was modern enough to defeat them pretty easily. The AI doesn't tend to level up its army much from game start, because in 1916 you'd be expecting at least siege artillery and trench infantry, but Britain was still using shrapnel artillery and skirmish infantry. Unfortunately for me, the princely states were still around, so I had to go and conquer them for yet more infamy. Of course, Austria demanded to cut me down to size, but I just said no, knowing they'd never be able to land in my country. Meanwhile, I used the new ability to start diplomatic plays while already in one to attack the princely states one by one. I also stopped building stuff to prevent a bankruptcy because my deficit was killing me faster than I expected, but because I'm recognized now, the interest payments are much more manageable. I also founded the Khalistan power block in 1920. If you know, you know. I didn't do anything with it because it was way too late in the campaign to do anything with it, but I made it a religious convocation with the idea to make a Sikh China. Cool run idea one day, by the way. It could be possible theoretically to form Sikh Britain by allowing the Sikh Empire to force Sikhism on the British Raj, and then forming England as the Raj, since they have English culture and can do that. I attacked France for their treaty port, and then finally, in 1920, I had enough of India to form them. I still wanted to clean up the borders, so naturally I kept warring, but reducing liberty desire in the Raj would take forever, so I let them stick around. This is a truly strange India, one which also rules most of China, and which has delegated its control over a lot of India to an English company, but you know, it works out I guess. The Raj is paying me some very nice money for my budget, but I do think it'd be better to just rule that land myself. This is India in 1922, and I hope this guide helps you. I didn't play perfectly, but the principles I went over should guide you towards victory. In summary, do not take debt until you're recognized, but if you do have to do it, then try to keep relations high with great power who can take on your debt. When attacking the EIC, attack one of their subjects so that they only join the war, and try to always do this before the EIC can attack you directly with all their subjects. Once the EIC gets puppeted, they are no longer a factor, and you can maintain good relations with Britain to ensure your safety while you invade Afghanistan and potentially China to build up your strength. You'll need raw materials more than anything, so getting Afghanistan for the iron and coal is huge. You'll want to consider Balochistan for lead, or Rajputana, and you've got sulfur in Sindh. When it comes to economic laws, I'd say start with interventionism or agrarianism, and then, once you've got a large investment pool, go to laissez-faire. As the Sikhs, having those extra government dividends is nice to support your massive army for your size, but once you've settled in and have a strong economy, the growth of laissez-faire will matter more. Anyway, that's my Sikh Empire guide. I hope it helps you, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for your time.